14-year-old Liam Corey set off along the Appalachian Trail one foggy morning, but never returned. For 18 months, no one found a trace, until a sheriff's crew unearthed a rust-seamed tin and strange, glass-lined bones beneath a quiet bend in the path, revealing a secret the ground had kept far too well. The shovel rang once and went still, a dull metal note swallowed by fog. Yellow tape tugged in the weak breeze, and the hill town beyond the treeline was only a smear of roofs and chimneys under blue light. Evan Merrick stepped beneath the tape, boot soles sinking into cold loam, and the smell rising from the opened earth was wet and sharp, like iron left in rain. Sheriff Wade Coulter stood at the lip of the pit with his hands on his belt and his hat pushed back, eyes on the spot where the shovel had struck. "There," Wade said, voice low but edged, as if he didn't want to wake the ground. "That's where it started." The bend in the path looked harmless, the kind of turnout hikers used for photos, yet every detail felt arranged. Tarps folded in neat squares, kneeling pads like small islands, survey flags stabbing the soil in careful lines. A ranger, Cole Rourke, passed Evan a spare radio and a coil of orange flags. The radio hissed in a small, steady rhythm, a sound like someone trying to breathe through cloth. Cole's jaw worked once before he spoke. "Trail echoes funny," he said, "even on quiet mornings." His tone tried to make it ordinary. It didn't land. Evan knelt at the grid edge and peered down. Two techs, both young, both trying to show steadiness with rigid shoulders, brushed away a mat of roots with soft paintbrushes. The shovel had exposed a curved seam of rust, and beside it, half veiled by clay, a length of pale bone no thicker than a man's thumb. Marks crossed that bone, too smooth for tool scrapes, too regular for random weathering. Evan felt his throat tighten, the way it did when a hard answer walked up wearing a simple face. He pulled a small notebook from his jacket and wrote 3 words he could stand behind. Curved seam found. Wade crouched and angled his flashlight, a cone of clean light cutting the fog. "Sealed tin," he said. "And bones. Markings we don't get." He kept his head still, eyes flicking to Evan only after the list was done. The county photographer snapped 2 shots. Each click sounded too loud. Evan measured the tin with his eye. Lunchbox small, solder line visible, edges crimped. Someone, sometime, had meant it to keep out weather. He did not let his mind decide why someone would hide it under a bend in a family trail. Boots scuffed behind him. Darren Corey had been standing back near the birch trunk, hands sunk in the pockets of a dark coat, jaw working like he was chewing the same thought over and over. He stepped forward now, 1 pace too close to the tape, eyes fixed at the dirt but not on any one thing. His voice came out flat with control. "How long until you open it?" Wade lifted a palm without turning. "We document first." The words were the right ones, but the sheriff's jaw showed he wanted answers almost as much as the father did. Evan looked at Darren, saw the sleep-starved eyes, the small white scar on the cheekbone, the way his left foot pressed the ground like he needed to feel something solid push back. There was a shape to a father's hope. It stood close to a pit and made itself thin to keep from falling in. Evan forced his attention to the work. "Grid lines hold," he said, not to command but to steady the room with sound. The techs nodded and went slower. The radio on Evan's chest breathed its little breath again. Hiss, hiss, hiss. He felt the urge to thumb the volume down and fought it. "You don't change the conditions you're here to read." Cole crouched beside him, forearm on knee, eyes on that pale length in the dirt. "You seeing those marks?" he asked. The question wasn't for show. It carried the weight of a man who had seen a lot of broken things and still knew when something didn't fit a known shelf. Evan nodded once. The bone was clean where the brush had passed, the lines on it so even they seemed drawn. Not knife, not root. He made a note. Markings regular. Fog lifted enough to show the ridgeline to the west. Birds were late to speak. Somewhere downtrail a boot scraped a stone and then stopped, as if the man wearing it had decided silence was the safer choice. Evan set 2 flags at the margin and traced the bend with his eyes. The place had the look of a bowl, a mild curve to gather rain, a feeling of held sound. Cole had called it Echo. Evan let the word sit in his head like a coin on his tongue. Echo was a kind word for something that stole and gave back at odd hours. Wade straightened. "We're going to lift that tin," he said to the team. "No motion on the bone until Jace gets here." He looked to Evan. "Pathologists on the way." Evan nodded. He kept his voice calm. "I'll stay off the line." Wade's gaze lingered a beat, as if to say he would hold him to that. The long, quiet part of work began. Small tools, slow breaths, angled mirrors, a hand pressed to the dirt to feel the ground answer. The first tech slid a trowel under the tin, eased, adjusted, eased again. Clay peeled back like old paint. The second tech brushed the seam. The tin moved this time, just enough for everyone around the pit to feel the shift. "Stop," Wade said, and the word dropped into the hole like a block. Hiss. The radio at Evan's chest breathed again, and his thumb, without his permission, found the volume knob but didn't turn. He glanced at Darren. The man's eyes were on the tin, but his focus drifted, each blink too long, each swallow a restart. Evan had seen that look before, in kitchens where chairs stayed pushed in for months, in backyards where bicycles rested against fences no one touched. He stepped close, low voice aimed at the gap between words and breath. "I'm going to tell you the truth when we have it." Darren's mouth tightened. "I want it now." The two sentences clinked against each other and lay between them, unfixable. "I'll be honest," Evan said, "even if honest is strange." Darren's reply was only a small nod, but the way he made it cost him. A new set of headlights swung through the trees and died. A county sedan had arrived. The pathologist, Jace Harlan, would be climbing the steps at the trailhead, the careful man with clean tools and a voice that could say hard things without making them harder. Evan kept his eyes on the pit. Patience mattered until it didn't, and the line between those two states was always thinner than memory made it. The wind dropped as if pinched. The fog thinned to silk. The world paused in a way that made men look at each other without moving their heads. And then the radio at Evan's collar changed, from breath to whisper, from noise to word. It was a single sound, a name shaped by damp air, Liam, not loud, not long, but clear as a glass struck with a fingernail. He did not flinch. Training doesn't kill surprise. It teaches you to let surprise die without taking your hands with it. He felt heat crawl across his neck and forced air into his chest. The radio surface went cold again. The hiss returned, modest and shy. Evan looked up. No one else moved. Maybe no one else had caught it. Or maybe no one wanted to be the first to say a name that already hurt. He could not write it down. Not yet. A note like that, radio spoke boy's name, would be a wedge in the trust he needed from a father and a sheriff who had agreed to let him stand this close. He wrote instead, "Radio Anomaly. Hold." Cole, who had been watching Evan more than the pit, tilted his head. The ranger's face had the creases of a man who woke with dawn and counted weather like news. "Sometimes," Cole said, as if he were explaining a trick of light, "you'll hear your own voice bounce back down the line. Trails got habits." He kept his tone easy, but the look he gave Evan made it a warning, too. Don't chase every odd thing. The hill will eat you with little bites. Evan slid his notebook into his jacket. The shovel blade, now used as a lever, lifted the tin a hair. Clay kissed metal and let go. The techs breathed in the same short time. Wade's hand came up again. "Hold." He scanned the faces, tech, ranger, father, consultant, as if reading a weather band. "We keep it slow," he said.
No surprises.
Darren's composure wobbled. He took one step closer, caught himself, and stepped back the same distance. "You said bones," he murmured, as if his mouth had to practice the word to make it real. Wade's reply was quiet. "We wait for Jace." The promise in the sentence was careful. Not a cure, not an answer, just the shape of a process that might carry a man through a door without breaking him on the frame. Evan crouched and put 2 fingers in the dirt. The soil under the skin was cold, and the cold moved into him the way a stream does, direct, patient, choosing its path. He gave the feeling a place to sit. He looked at the tin. Solder line, Child-scratched initials? He didn't let his mind guess letters. Guessing wrote stories before facts had a chance to speak. He watched the edges and listened to the breaths of the men around the pit, the tiny chorus of focus and fear. Footsteps onward behind them, Harlan on the boards, a case knocking softly against his knee. Evan didn't turn. He let Wade handle the arrival. He kept his eyes on the field, the way he had taught himself to do when a kitchen table became a courtroom without a judge. Look at the thing, not the story the thing invites. Light, Wade said. Cole adjusted the stand lamp so the metal seam shone, water beating along it like small eyes. Angle, Wade said. The second tech moved the mirror. Easy. The shovel tipped again. Clay cracked in a soft ring. The tin shifted toward free. The radio breathed. Hiss, hiss, hiss. Evan told himself the earlier word was a trick of air, a name-shaped noise against a coil. He didn't believe his own lie, but sometimes you stack small lies to hold off a larger one until tools catch up. Darren dragged a hand over his face. The motion left a clean bar of skin through the fog's fine damp. He looked at Evan and tried again for steadiness. If it's my son, he said, I need you to say it. The condition was simple and brutal. Evan nodded once. I will. He meant it. He also meant that if the truth was stranger than any man wanted, he would still say it and live with what that did to a room. A jay barked from the treeline. Its echo came back bruised and smaller. Cole glanced that way and then at the radio, as if measuring which echo to take seriously. The lamp hummed. The camera clicked. The ground yielded another centimeter. The day gathered itself for the first real cut. Wade checked his watch, a gesture that broke the spell just enough to let the world breathe again. He seemed to weigh time against patience and find neither to scale. He tapped the glass with a knuckle and finally looked straight at Evan, making the boundary clear because clear lines keep men from making preventable mistakes. Wade tapped his watch and said, You're here to observe, not direct. But if you see something, say something, all right. The first shovel bit under the mat of roots and levered up a sheet of black earth, slick as a cut. A breath of metal came up with it, wet iron, old nails, rain trapped in soil. The men eased back without a word. Milo Cade crouched, trowel angled in his gloved palm, and worried a pale curve from the loam. That's not stone, he said, voice tight with interest. His shoulders were hunched the way men lean in when curiosity wins over cold. They widened the pocket with careful strokes. The curve revealed a rust-brown tin, edges soldered, its lid pressed shut by time. 2 initials had been scratched twice into the lid, hard and uneven. LQ Milo slid the tin onto a square of canvas. His breath fogged the cold air as he reached for a blade. Hold, Sheriff Wade Coulter said, steady and level. Milo froze. A thin glint caught on the cuff of his glove. He tugged back and a shard popped free, black as pitch, smooth as a tear. It sat in his palm like a drop of cooled lava. Obsidian? Cole Rourke asked, frowning. We don't have volcanoes. Milo angled the shard toward the pale morning. It did not catch light so much as swallow it. He reached for an evidence bag, misjudged the edge of the canvas, and flinched. The shard kissed his finger through the glove. He hissed, more surprised than hurt. You all right? Wade asked, already leaning. It's nothing, Milo said, but he stared at the tip of his glove. A bead welled up under the fabric and seeped along the seam. It should have looked red against the mud. It looked darker. Evan Merrick felt a dry swallow he could not explain and told himself to log it later, not feel it now. Dr. Jace Harlan slid in beside the tin with the patience of a man who lives with sharp things. Let's open our box, he said softly. He trimmed the solder with a neat, slow cut, blade rocking the way you'd cut a stubborn apple. The lid gave with a small sigh. Inside, a tiny speaker the size of a matchbook, mesh no thicker than gauze. A folded map on wax paper. A nickel chain holding a broken arrowhead. The speaker's mesh flickered. No cable, no visible cell, just a small, pulsing light like a heartbeat beneath cloth. Wade's jaw set. Nobody touches the speaker, he said. Photograph, then bag. Evan leaned over the wax paper, careful not to shade it. A A second path had been sketched in faint pencil beside the marked trail, Nightstone's line doubled by a ghost line. A label in small, tidy letters, return line. The ghost path ducked under the printed mile number and curved back toward a creek the map called Hushwater. Evan felt the name land. He pressed it to memory the way you press a thumb to a page you plan to return to. Liam ever draw maps? Evan asked, not looking up. Keep it light, keep it useful. Darren Corey stood just off the tarp, hands buried in his coat, jaw locked so hard a muscle ticked. He liked puzzles, Darren said. Built little circuits from spare parts. Watched videos. Put together kits better than I could. Where'd he learn that? Evan asked, gentle. Answer me and I can help you, he thought. Darren's eyes slid to the treeline. Online, he said, and his shoulders closed a fraction, as if the question had reached further than he wanted anyone to go. Bone! A voice called from the pit. Cole and Milo were already moving. Wade lifted a hand, letting Harlan set the pace. They cleared the dirt with soft brushes. A length of radius came up from the earth like a pale crescent. Age lines were there if you knew how to see them. So was something else, fine as frost. Thin ribbons of fused silica clung to the shaft, glassy threads folded along the curve. Harlan bent close, his breath shallow so he would not fog his own view. That is unusual, he murmured. Like glass made where bone should be. Evan wrote 3 words on his pad. Silica on bone. Now. He did not raise his voice. It didn't matter. Every man moved as if pulled by the same string. Clicks ran around the circle, one set after another going quiet. Evan kept his set steady in his hand. His thumb hesitated over the switch. The map lay open in his mind, the ghost path, the word Hushwater, the return that wasn't a straight line. The tiny speaker in the tin kept its faint pulse, like a heartbeat too small to save. He should not. He knew that. There were rules for scenes like this. Don't contaminate. Don't lead. Don't promise what you cannot hold. But the father was swaying on his feet, and Evan knew too well what silence could do to a family. He lowered his head, as if studying the tin, and angled the radio close to his mouth. Liam, he whispered, barely pushing air. If you can hear me, we're here. The speaker's mesh flared, twice, quick, like a blink. Then it went still, the tiny light gone. The radios in the circle, even the ones switched off, breathed a single hiss and fell quiet like animals settling. Cole stared at the shard still half-wrapped in plastic, then at the pit, then at Evan. He kept his voice so low it was almost a thought. That shard isn't glass, Merrick, he said, a mix of awe and warning in his tone. It's a recorder. Evan's chest felt tight. The air smelled like wet iron and pine bark and cold sweat. He knelt on one knee and set his notepad on the canvas, the way a man kneels at a pew when he needs his words to be clean. He wrote one sentence straight as a rail without crossing out a single letter. The ground keeps what we say and gives it back when it wants to, not when we do. Metal trays rattled as Dr. Jace Harlan eased the last of the bones onto the clean table. The Ranger Barnes field lab smelled like bleach and wet wood. A single work lamp hung low, throwing a white circle that made every scratch and seem look louder than it was. Harlan's hands were steady. His face was set in that plain, careful way men use when the truth is sharp. Male, he said, eyes on the growth plates, voice even. 14 fits. But this, he angled a radius under the light. A smooth tunnel ran clean through the shaft, edges glazed. No stress cracks, no splintering. This isn't decay. Evan Merrick leaned in until the bulb warmed his cheek. The tunnel's lining caught the light and sent it back in a dull, glassy sheen. He thought of lightning, the way it fuses sand into strange glass. Silica, Harlan said, confirming the thought without looking up. I've only seen this near lightning strikes or where an arc has jumped. Not in a boy's bone. Evan's pencil hovered over his notebook. He had come for facts, but the shape of the facts kept trying to be a pattern. Shard. Beaker. Silica. He wrote the 3 words down and drew a thin line between them, hard enough to dent the page. Behind him, Milo Cade stood at a side table with the tiny speaker they'd pulled from the tin. He had the back plate off, a frown pinching his brow. "No battery," Milo said, surprise softening his voice. He held up a wafer the size of a postage stamp, the same black glass they'd found near the dig. "It's just this. And contacts." He lowered a metal probe to the wafer as if tapping a sleeping animal. The room speaker on the shelf gave a low hum. The light bulb above the table trembled in its clamp, a faint ring in the glass like a coin spinning to a stop. "Stop," Sheriff Wade Coulter said. He didn't raise his voice. Milo didn't move. "Stop," Wade said again, louder now, hand half raised. Milo pulled the probe back, swallow visible in his throat. The hum died. The bulb steadied. The barn seemed to exhale. Darren Corey stood in the doorway with his jacket half zipped, teeth working on the inside of his cheek. He didn't come closer. He didn't leave. "I can't listen to all this," he said. And yet he listened, eyes fixed on the bones as if they might speak if he stared hard enough. Harlan lifted a scope lens and pressed it gently to the silica lining. The lens fogged with his breath, then cleared. "Look at this," he murmured. Evan stepped beside him. The glaze wasn't smooth. It held microscopically fine grooves, too even to be accident and too close to be hand-carved. They spiraled like the faint lines on a record. "Tracks," Evan said. "Something like that," Harlan replied. He didn't smile. "Too regular to be natural." Evan's mind flashed to the wax paper map from the tin. How a second path had been sketched beside Nightstone. Faint but sure, labeled in a boy's hand. Return line. He felt, for a breath, as if a string had been laid across his ribs and pulled tight. "Darren," he said, turning carefully. "That name, return line. What did it mean to Liam?" "Game term," Darren said at once, as if he had practiced it. His eyes didn't move. "It means you find your way back." "It looks like an instruction set," Evan said, trying to keep his voice gentle. The word set made Darren flinch. There were some words men only heard in courtrooms and sick rooms. Evan knew he had just used one of them. Milo set the wafer down and rubbed his gloved thumb across his other hand. The glove was thin, and through it, around the nick on his finger from the dig, a faint gray stain had risen under the skin, the exact color of pencil lead. "It doesn't hurt," he said when he saw Evan watching. He kept rubbing anyway, the way you rub at a scuff on a table even when you know it's not on the surface. "It's just there." The room speaker popped with a little intake of static, as if it were about to speak and had to gather air first. All of them froze. Wade's gaze cut to the shelf. A voice came through, older, steady, with the soft hiss of distance. "Nolan, the loop works if the ground is quiet." The steel probe stopped dead with a dull clink, slid through something that crumbled like stale bark, then caught again on a harder ridge. Evan eased his grip, feeling the vibration run up the rod into his palm. "There," he said, steady but tight. Cole was already kneeling, clearing leaves with the flat of his hand. The creek hissed past them in a slow whisper, and the stones in its bed shone with a dark glaze that made the water look older than it was. They set the square, third in the grid, then worked the trowels in small bites, patient as clock hands. The soil gave way in clods that smelled of wet iron. A bent tin surfaced under the point of Cole's blade, its lid flattened by a rock that must have fallen and settled there for a long time. Cole pried the stone free and let it thud to the canvas. Evan brushed the rust with a thumb. "Same seam," he murmured. The solder line ran like a scar, familiar and wrong. Cole drew a breath through his nose, shoulders squared, voice low. "Let's open it clean." The trowel became a wedge, the wedge a lever, and the lid yielded with a thin sigh. Inside lay a single shoe, small, blue, not Liam's size, its laces knotted stiff and the tongue crushed by pressure. A folded scrap of paper sat beneath the heel. Evan lifted it with tweezers. One word in block letters, Tobin. He felt the name land in his chest and not move. Cole's face changed the way faces do when air gets thin. "No Tobin on the list," he said. His tone was careful. Careful meant afraid without admitting it. A coil of wire lay beside the shoe, fused into an almost perfect loop, black at the seam as if it had tasted fire. Evan pinched it by the edge and the loop buzzed against his glove like a trapped fly. It shivered in his hand, then went quiet the second he set it on the canvas. He watched the water slide past, listening for a pattern to the silence and not liking that he could almost hear one. Upstream, he said. Cole followed his line of sight. 3 posts rose from the bend, thin as drumsticks, capped with black discs set level with the surface. No tags.
No markings.
They looked like tools that tried to pretend they were stones. Cole's jaw tightened. Those aren't ours. It wasn't a guess. It was a ranger's certainty. He would have signed a form, assigned a crew, marked a map. He had done none of those things. Evan waded out, slow, testing each slick rock with the edge of his boot. The water came up cold and sure around his calves. He touched a cap with 2 fingers. His teeth sang. A quick, bright vibration that made his molars ache, as if someone had plucked a wire inside his head. He pulled back, breath shallow. Behind him, Cole had already raised the radio to call in the find. Before he keyed the mic, the radio spoke on its own. "We're here," it said in Evan's voice, flat at the edges, as if pressed in a book and then read aloud. Evan almost dropped it. He couldn't help the laugh that burst out of him, one short note that did not mean joy. Fear has a way of sounding like humor when there is not enough room left in the body for anything else. Cole eyed the posts, then the bank. "It's a loop," he said. "Loops mean fences." He dragged his boot heel through the gravel and found, with the toe, the next post under the skim of water. Evan traced them one by one around the bend. They formed a half-circle that did not feel like a welcome. It was the shape of a smile that did not mean well. Above them, the drone wave had sent pitched as if a hand had slapped one rotor. It dipped, steadied, jerked again. Cole cupped his earpiece. "Video's stuttering," he said, squinting into the reflected glare. "Hold on. It's back." On Evan's screen, the water shivered with a faint grid, lines of ghostlight laid over the stones, as though the creek wore a net no one had agreed to throw. Evan did not say the word net. Words were tools, the wrong tool could close a circuit. He felt the thought tug anyway and shook it off like a spider thread. Cole crouched at the canvas and lifted the shoe with both hands, careful as if it still belonged to a foot. "Look at this tread," he whispered. The rubber was barely scuffed, the pattern crisp. "This is new." His voice softened into something like a prayer. He might not be a ghost yet. The water ran like it always did, but the bank seemed to lean in, listening for what they would do next. Evan set the coil back in the tin and sealed the lid with tape, then set the tin in a dry square of the canvas as if heat could rise through damp soil. He could feel the line forming in his head. What to do, in what order, how to keep a place from swallowing its own echoes. Find the man who built things this way. Find where the boys learned. Find out why the ground had started talking back. His hands did not shake, but he wanted them to. He trusted the kind of fear you could see. "Listen," Cole said. At first it was only the creak. Then a faint clicking from the drone feed, like a needle finding the start of a groove. The camera steadied, hovered, drifted half a foot, stopped again. Evan watched the posts. The caps were dead black. If there was a ring of light in them, it was asleep with one eye open. He cleared his throat and could still feel the echo of his own voice in the radio, lodged like grit. "That wasn't a recording from earlier," he said. "It caught me while I was standing here." He wanted to keep his voice even and found he could not lower it. "It's answering faster than it should." Cole nodded once, not taking his eyes from the water. He smelled like rain and metal. "We don't touch the rest," he said. His hand hovered an inch above a second cap and then retreated. "Not until we know what tells it to start and what tells it to stop." The grid on the screen brightened when Evan stepped closer and dimmed when he stepped back. He tried it again, smaller steps. Tracked him the way a dog tracks a shadow. He pictured a fence you could not see, the kind with no barbs, just rules. He did not know the rules yet. The creek did. He crouched and looked at the thin posts from the level of the water. The caps were scabbed with tiny scratches. Not many. Enough to prove hands had been here. Boy's hands, curious and sure. He tried to see it from their eye line, dusk, a ring in the current, the dare to touch first. He felt anger start in his chest and forced it to cool before it could burn his judgment. Bag that shoe, he said. Tag the tin. He spoke in tasks because tasks are ropes you can hold inside your head when the ground feels like it wants to move. Cole slid the shoe into evidence, paper rustling like a dry leaf. You think Tobin is one of the club kids? He asked. The question held more than its words. It held a father's weight, even though Cole was no father. It was the kind of question men ask when they imagine the house across the road and a name they have heard only at the gas station. Evan did not answer. He was looking at a groove in the mud where someone had knelt before. The knee print was small. Recent rain had not washed it. He could count the threads from the fabric of the pants, which meant the imprint was no older than a day, maybe two. He held his palm over the mark and felt the water's breath rise and fall around his fingers. The radio crackled. Not static, not wind. A voice, low and even, the tone of an older man who has to say a hard thing as kindly as he can. Stay quiet. The words came through clean, with no scrape of interference. And for a heartbeat both men looked around as if a third had stepped close enough to lay a hand on their shoulders. The chain snapped with a dull clack, and the metal door shuddered on its hinges. Wade pushed in first, shoulder low, one palm hovering near his holster. Not a threat, a reflex born from bad rooms. Cold dust rose in a thin breath. The place smelled like damp wood, old coffee, and the faint, sharp bite of solder. A single bulb burned over the workbench, its light a tired circle on plywood crowded with circuit boards pinned like dead butterflies. Nolan Crest stood in that circle as if he had been waiting without moving. Thin, pale, ink along his fingers as if he had been writing in the dark and missed the paper. He held a chipped mug in both hands. The rim trembled against his lip though he didn't drink. His eyes ticked from Wade to Evan, then to the floor as if the knots in the plank could hide him. How many people know you're here? Wade asked. His voice was even. Even could be kind or it could be a warning. Today it meant, tell me the truth. Just me, Nolan said. The mug kept shaking, so he pressed it to his chest like a warm stone. And the boys sometimes. Not at night. Evan stepped in behind Wade, scanning. Coils stacked in milk crates, spools of wire. A salvaged radio split open to show its ribs. On the far wall, a hand-drawn map took up an old corkboard. Nightstone in a thick black stroke, a second, fainter path shadowing it labeled return line, and a broken pale arc that barely showed it all. Borrow, lettered in a careful hand. Evan pointed. That yours? Nolan's mouth moved before the sound came. Most of it. Some of it is theirs. Theirs who? Wade said. The boys, Nolan said, small. They like to copy. They like to feel useful. Evan kept his tone plain. We dug up a tin on Nightstone, found a tiny speaker, a wax paper map, and a chain with a broken arrowhead. We found posts in Hushwater. Your wire runs under this door and into the dirt. Nolan's gaze darted to the threshold where a hair-thin line did what roots do, disappeared into soil. He set the mug down, missing the coaster and flinching at the soft knock it made. I shouldn't have set it up here, he said. I wanted to keep it away from houses. Safe, Wade said, scanning the shelves. That word travel with you, Nolan? It was meant to be safe, Nolan said. He pinched the bridge of his nose, ink smearing. Little passive things. We thought the ground holds sound after storms. Like grooves. If you are patient, you can hear the old day hum again. People wanted that. Parents wanted that. Evan heard the hollow in the word parents and did not step into it. He moved to the wall map. The paper edges were soft from being handled. The return line traced under mile 23 like a shadow trying to catch up. Who named this return line? Liam, Nolan said. His eyes dropped to the mug and stayed there. He liked to draw mirror paths so he could find his way back in a game. He said a good map shows you a second trail you don't see at first. Wade glanced at Evan. No nods, no notes said out loud. Just the quiet click of a look that meant keep going. You said little passive things, Evan said. But the posts in the creek have caps. They don't look little. Nolan's hands folded and unfolded like paper trying to be a crane. I tested a bigger loop once. Months ago. 3 caps in water, 3 on land. You make a circle, then you stay quiet in it. The idea was the loop would gather weak echoes, thunder, boots, names, and let them run around until you could pick them up again. He swallowed. It was supposed to be old sound. Nothing new. But one night it answered too fast. Like someone was right there. His eyes lifted. I stopped. I swear I stopped. Wade's jaw worked. Yet the wire is live under your door. Nolan looked toward the thin line in the dust. I unplugged from power. But the ground doesn't need my outlets when it's charged already. Evan crossed to the bench. A ledger lay there, ruled columns in careful pencil. First names, ages, little square marks. Ink from Nolan's fingers had smudged the corner where his thumb always rested. He read the entries the way a man reads a list of stones he has to carry across a river. Slow, counting weight. Near the bottom, Tobin, 12, hold. No check. Below it, Liam, 14, pass. A mark in the square. And next to it, a small note in tight script. Too clear. Too clear, Evan said. He kept his voice level. The word could mean bright, could mean dangerous. Nolan pulled the ledger back half an inch like a man pulling a blanket up to his chin. He built clean joints. He could tune by ear. If a tone wandered, he could bring it home. It's a gift some have. And gifts get used, Wade said. Not by me, Nolan said, quick and soft at the same time. The boys solder here at the table. Daylight. Never at the creek. Never at night. Evan took in the room again. The bulb hummed like a thin bee. Outside, the water tower's ribs pinged as morning heat worked into old steel. Beneath all of it, a hush sat in the floorboards like a held breath. His objective was simple. Draw a line from what they had found to the man in front of him. Not a wish line. A line that would stand up to daylight. You told someone how to set the loop, Evan said. If not a boy, then who? Silence rested its hand on Nolan's shoulder. He shrugged it off without using his hands. One of the boys brought a page, he said at last. Neat diagrams. 3 caps here, 3 caps there. A clean half circle in water. And a note. Return sounds to source. I thought his brother helped him. He said he dreamed it. Wade moved to the radio on the shelf. It was an old field unit, dented on one corner. He turned the knob an 8th turn. The speaker hissed the way rain does far off. Then the room caught Evan's own voice, flat and thin. The words he had spoken at the trail that morning. We're here. Every man in the shed froze a heartbeat, as if a living thing had just walked in. Nolan's face changed in a small, tired way, as if a truth he already knew had climbed onto the table and sat down. It holds on, he said. After thunder, after names. It is better at soft than loud. The radio did not settle. A second voice found its way into the room, traveling on that hiss the way a canoe travels on a still lake. It was not an adult and not little either, a boy's voice that had learned carefulness. Borrow, don't take, it said. A rule, not a plea. Then the hiss went back to being hiss. Wade's eyes were not still now. Who recorded that? I don't know, Nolan said. And he sounded like a man trying not to break a bone made of air. Sometimes I think the ground itself learns. The silica, the stone, keeps the shape of sound like wax keeps the shape of a seal. You press too hard, it cracks. If you press just right, it keeps. Safe, Wade said again, quieter. You keep saying safe and then you say crack. Nolan's hands opened in surrender. The tremor in them looked almost like a code. I was trying to help parents who could not stand silence, he said. They come to me and say, teach my son something real. Give him work that keeps him busy. And then they come back when storms roll through and ask me if the ground hears. I should have said no. I told myself the boys were only soldering simple joints. I told myself I was teaching care. But care is not the same thing as wisdom. Evan watched him choose each word. He watched Wade mark each one down inside his own head. He felt under his boots that the floor liked quiet. He could imagine, too easily, a creak that liked it even more. "Who is Tobin?" Evan asked, tapping the ledger. "A boy who came once," Nolan said. He looked ill in the bright light. He said his house had cloth on the vents because noise kept him awake. "I told his father to take him home and bring him back after a good sleep. They didn't return." "And Liam?" Wade said. "Bright," Nolan said. His eyes shifted to the map as if the drawn lines might answer for him. "Restless." He had a way of making a wire sit still without touching it. He said the trick was to speak like you wanted the sound to stay. Not loud, not proud, clear. He called it soft talk. Nolan's throat tightened. He drew that return line there, a nod at the shadow path. Said it was a mirror to keep you from getting lost. Evan stood with the map inches from his face and let the lines blur. He heard a drip somewhere in the shed. A bird outside tapped a metal rung, the sound thin and bright. He wrote a short line in his notebook, no poetry, no reach. Map names come from someone. He felt the weight of Wade's expectation beside him and the heavier weight of Darren's face still in his memory from the trail. Parents who wanted sound. Boys who wanted to be useful. A man in a shed who had built a circle he didn't fully understand. "Take us to the club notebook," Wade said. No tilt in his voice. Orders sit better when they carry their own balance. Nolan reached under the bench and slid out a battered binder. Inside, plastic sleeves held pages full of small writing, sketches of coils, simple radio schematics labeled with block letters. On one page, a child's hand had drawn 3 capped posts and 3 stones and written in neat print under the curve, "Make a circle of quiet you do not cross." On another, the words "return line," "mirror route" were underlined twice. The last page was a grid where the boys had practiced writing their names small and tidy, as if shrinking letters could make their owners safer. Wade photographed each page with his phone, careful to keep his shadow off. "These boys work in pairs?" he asked. "Always," Nolan said. "No one alone. It was a rule I kept." "Good," Wade said. He didn't praise often. He didn't now. He just marked the fact and set it down in the ledger of his mind. "We will need the list of members, and the tools and the spools and anything with a copied map." Nolan nodded and, for a second, seemed to steady. He might have liked being told what to hand over. It gave shape to fear. He turned to gather spools, then paused, eyes on the radio again. The hiss had changed, pulsed like a slow breath, in and out, in and out. He lowered his voice without being asked, as if the air would carry words further if you treated it gently. "It hears us better when we speak softly," he whispered, mostly to himself. "It loves the soft ones best." The light above the table was harsh and white, a square sun that left no room for shadows. Nolan Crest blinked up into it, jaw tight, fingers curled around a chipped mug he never drank from. Milo slid the artifacts into the glow one by one. The wafer from the tin, the creek coil fused into its loop, the small broken arrowhead, each piece clicking against stainless steel with a clean, brittle note. Dr. Jace Harlan worked with fast, neat hands, sketching the smooth tunnels through bone, tracing each line with the blunt end of his pen until the paper bristled with arrows. He pushed the page toward Nolan. The paper made a soft hiss on the table, like a small thing trying to leave. Nolan stared. His eyes watered from the light. He looked away toward the dark glass, then back to the page, as if it might forgive him before the people behind the glass did. "I built a ground harp," he said, voice tight, thumb rubbing the mug handle. "Wires in soft dirt. Picks up tiny shakes. Sometimes songs, metal thin. Sometimes voices, if thunder rolled 2 nights before." Wade Coulter planted his hands on the table and leaned in, the leather of his belt creaking, the badge a dull circle on his chest. "Any boy in the loop when it hummed, Nolan?" "No," Nolan said too quickly. The word hit the room like a dropped coin. Evan Merrick heard the fear inside it, a note under the note. He glanced through the one-way glass. Darren Corey stood on the other side, separated by choice, palms spread against the pane, breath fogging a faint oval that came and went. He did not blink much. He stared at the objects like a man starving stares at a plate he is not allowed to touch. Evan felt a familiar pull in his ribs, the tug of a story that started long before anyone knew it was a story. He kept his hands flat on his notebook so they would not show it. Cole Rourke stepped in from the hallway with wet boot prints and a coiled length of dirty cable in his fist. The wind outside pushed once at the barn doors and let go. "Posts in Hushwater are wired," he said, voice low. "Line runs toward the old quarry. Splits 3 ways under slate. Digging will be slow, might be ugly." Harlan slid the bone sketch back to himself and clicked on a magnifier. "These tunnels are lined with fused silica," he said, tapping the drawing. "Lightning does that, or very precise energy. The lines are too clean to be an accident." Milo flexed his bandaged finger and winced. A faint gray mark ringed the cut, like pencil lead under skin. When he stood closer to the coil, the gray seemed to wake, warmer by a shade. "It tingles," he murmured, embarrassed by the smallness of the word. He did not step away. "Sit down," Harlan ordered without looking up. "No more touching the coil." Milo shook his head once, his jaw set. "I can help." Evan watched the boy. Boys who grow into good men often say, "I can help," in quiet rooms like this, not to be brave, but because they are. He turned back to Nolan. "Explain, borrow line. In plain words." Nolan took a breath, failed to make it steady. His knee bounced under the table. "Borrow line holds whispers from the past a bit longer. Nothing moves. You listen. Return line." He stopped, swallowed, forced the next words. "Return line tries to answer. With more than sound." Wade's brow rose. "Answer who?" "Whoever asks," Nolan said. Eyes on the diagram, not the men. He tapped the sketch tunnels. His nail clicked the paper. "This ground, gray hollow, has silica veins laced through it. It records. It writes over itself after storms. Like the world's oldest tape that never quite clears." The radio on the shelf let out a sigh of static. Every head turned. Silence settled again, thick as a blanket. Evan kept his tone even. "Your ledger list had Tobin hold." "Why?" Nolan's mouth tightened. He rubbed the mug's rim until the pad of his finger reddened. "Tobin Everhart came once. He went pale. He sat outside after. He lives near the creek. His father works nights at the quarry gate. I didn't push. No one wanted to make trouble." Wade nodded to a deputy in the doorway. "Check on the house. Now." The man vanished at a jog. Wade turned back. "If a kid is tangled in this, we untangle him fast." Harlan peered through the magnifier again. "These grooves repeat at even distances," he said. "Like a scale. A pattern meant to be played." "That's what I'm afraid of," Evan said softly. He could hear the creak in his head, the slow run of it, the way sound there felt like it had corners. He wrote one line on his pad and stopped before the words made him choose a path he could not leave. The deputy's voice crackled over the radio. "House is locked. Mail stacked. No answer." Behind the glass, Darren shifted. The fogged oval on the pane grew, then faded, then did not return. Evan's throat tightened. He looked left. The hallway beyond the glass was empty. "Darren?" he said, as if the man might hear him through the pane. The glass gave nothing back. Wade moved to the door and scanned the hallway himself, eyes gone sharp. He did not swear. He did not have to. He turned to Nolan with a hardness that made the smaller man's shoulders fold. "If return line answers, what does it want paid?" Nolan sat very still. The light bleached his face. "Balance," he whispered. "Always balance." Cole's radio popped like a finger on a jar lid. The static thinned, gathered, and formed a single breath. A boy's voice slipped out of the speaker, not loud, not clear, but alive enough to turn every face toward it. "Dad," the radio said, and the tiny room felt suddenly too small for all the airmen needed to take in at once. Darren stood ankle-deep in the creek, inside the ring of black-capped posts, the chain with Liam's arrowhead trembling between his fingers. He was so still the rain beaded on his hair and did not roll. Water pressed at his shoes, cold enough to numb. Silt curled like smoke around his laces. The half-circle of posts faced him like a row of blank eyes. Evan stopped at the bank and held there, the toe of his boot cutting a line in wet soil. The old warning lived in his head, stay quiet, and he did not trust what quiet meant here. Darren, Evan called low, as if volume itself could break something. Don't move. Darren raised the chain an inch. The arrowhead clicked against his knuckles. Liam, he said one word, small but heavy. The creek answered with ripples that ran against the wind, crisscrossing like threads pulled the wrong way. A thin column of bubbles rose at the bend's center, straight as a string. On the drone tablet in Cole's hands, a faint lattice flickered under the surface, lines making squares that shivered and held. Cole's jaw tightened. Field's active, he said, voice steady but urgent. Step in and you might close the circuit. Evan's grip found the tiny speaker wafer in his pocket without thinking. Warmth pushed into his palm, like a small fever. He pictured his shoe, one step farther, touching the water. He pictured the invisible grid snapping shut around both men. Darren, listen to me, he said. If you move, move back. Milo was already wading downstream, against orders, eyes fixed on something snagged near a root. It's not a root, he said, breath quick. His gloved hands pulled. A tardark wire came free with a damp pop. The two closest posts dimmed, their caps fading like coals losing air. Harlan's voice burst from the field radio at Evan's belt, tense and thin through static. Stop. Do not pull anything else. The pattern is shifting, not failing. Those bone tunnels guided energy, not scatter. Do not break the field. Darren lifted the arrowhead higher, his mouth shaking but set. I'm here, son, he said. The words were soft, the tone the kind fathers use when they want to be brave so their boys do not have to be. The wafer heated in Evan's hand. A boy's voice came through it, close as breath behind an ear. I can't tell if I'm in the dark or inside the word dark. The sound ran a knife under Evan's ribs. He was a man who wrote what he saw, not what he wished. Still, the truth of that voice made his knees feel loose. Nolan stumbled out of the trees, sweat ghosting his brow, his eyes on the posts. Don't break it, he called, chest heaving. Detune it. If you cut it, it will look for another path. Cole glanced back at him. Detune how? It's a creek. Noise, Nolan said, hands sketching a circle he would not enter. Big, wrong noise. Flood the pattern. Make it miss. Wade, already sighting the drone feed over Cole's shoulder, made his choice. He drew, aimed high, and fired once. The crack leapt up the valley, clean and hard. Birds tore from the pines. A branch chuckled with falling rain. Under the surface the lattice flared, every square shining like wire struck by lightning. Look, Harlan said in Evan's earpiece. Awe and dread braided together. Those arcs, they match Liam's ulna and femur lengths. It isn't a grave. It's arranged like an instrument. From the creek bed, bones rose in a tight ring, wrapped in a skin of glass so thin it looked like frost. They did not float. They were held, as if hands Evan could not see were lifting them into the light. A hum slid into the air, low at first, then higher, not a song but a measure. The bank shook a little. Evan felt it in his molars. Darren made a sound that was half a cry and half a word. The posts began to strobe. White, dark, white. Each flash pressed on Evan's tongue and made his teeth ache. The drone booted into a warning and froze, stuck in the glare. The hum climbed. The bones sang without moving. The bubbles thinned to nothing but the circle held. Evan, Cole said, voice flattening with fear he kept out of his face. We can't stand in this. Either shut it up or we're going in after him, and I think that's worse. Evan looked at Darren, at the arrowhead, at the water's hard shine. He felt the wafer warm as skin, and thought of rules he did not understand and a boy who had loved small circuits and clear maps. The anger in him wasn't at anyone. It was at the shape of the moment, a trap built out of grief and clever hands. He made his choice before fear could talk him out of it. He pulled the wafer free, stepped to the edge, and threw. The disc struck and slipped under, a dull coin vanishing into ink. For a breath, nothing. Then the creak sang a wrong note, sour and wide, like a bowed saw dragged over rust. The hum bent. The lattice wavered. Squares lost their corners and bowed inward. On the tablet, the grid loosened its grip. The bones shivered and lowered, glass skin sweating into water. The posts blinked slower, then stopped, dark as stones. Air rushed back into the bend with a hollow throat whoosh. Sound returned to the trees in plain shapes, branches knocking, rain in leaves, someone's boots slipping and catching. All at once the creek was only a creek again. The bright was gone. The water ran around ankles and posts and a wedge of old slate. Darren's shoulders fell. He clutched the chain to his sternum and closed his eyes. The drone's propellers whirred back to a normal buzz and drifted to a steady hold. The radio at Evan's belt gave one last breath. The voice was small this time and almost kind. "Borrow, don't take," it said. Back at the barn, Wade spread a map across the scarred table and set his palm on the center as if to pin the entire town in place. "3 moves," he said, voice clipped. "Find Tobin Everhart and make sure he isn't tangled in this thing. Track the quarry cable to its source and shut it down without dropping anyone into slate. And keep Darren away from Hushwater. Grief opens doors we don't want opened." The task light hummed. Cold air smelled of damp canvas and machine oil. Everyone stood close, as if distance itself could fray the plan. Evan watched the corners of the map lift and settle with each breath in the room. He felt the press of his own promise, to tell the truth even when it was strange, tighten across his chest like a strap. He wrote the 3 objectives down and underlined each. Simple words, hard work. Nolan hovered at the far end of the table, eyes on his ink-stained fingers. When he finally spoke, it came out small. "The creek posts, the layout, it did not start with me." Wade's eyes sharpened. "Meaning?" A boy came to the club with a page of diagrams. Neat lines, clean symbols. Nolan's hand trembled as he drew an arc in the air. 3 caps in water, 3 on land, a half circle, and 1 note in block letters. "Return sounds to source." I thought an older brother had sketched it. The boy said he dreamed it. Cole's jaw worked, a tired muscle barely holding back questions. "Which boy?" Nolan shook his head. "I won't name him. Not until we know what this is." He looked at the map, then away. "I thought the design was harmless, passive. I was wrong." Dr. Harlan bent over a tray where a thin sliver of fused silica lay under a magnifier. He tapped a pencil against his teeth as if keeping time. "I compared the grooves in the silica to a record," he said, steady and low. "They repeat at measured distances. Not static. Not noise. A scale." He met Evan's eyes. "Scales are played by intention." Milo stood with his hands jammed into his pockets, shoulders tight. The nick on his finger had pooled into a faint gray loop under the skin, from wrist to thumb, like a wire drawn by a patient hand. He flexed, winced, then tried to play it off. "It warms up near the coil," he said, forcing a thin smile. "And I keep hearing a low tone, like a train way out there." He tapped his jaw. "In here." Evan wrote, "Milo hears key." He didn't like how clinical his own handwriting looked against what felt human and raw. The coil sat on a work mat, quiet as a snake that had decided to sleep with one eye open. He imagined sound having weight and balance, like stones you moved in a river to change its voice. If someone had built a scale, who was placing the weights? "Let's see the cable," Wade said. He folded the map with hard edges, the way men fold fear. "Cole." "Evan, you're with me." The afternoon shrank to a gray strip of sky as they drove to the quarry fence. Wind slid through pines and carried the metallic bite of cold rock. At a side gate, a new padlock bright as a tooth hung from a chain. No stamp, no brand. Cole clipped it with bolt cutters, the snap echoing down the fence line, a clean cut that felt like a line crossed. Inside, the ground rose in broken shelves. Evan and Cole used steel rods like divining wands, punching down, listening for the muffled thunk of slate. Every few steps, the rod sang dull and heavy. Cole said, There, and they chalked a line over dirt where the buried cable ran like a stubborn vein. Wade radioed back coordinates in a calm, clipped rhythm. The quarry swallowed sound. Even their boots sounded careful. They followed the chalk into a service tunnel cut years ago. The air cool and still, walls damp with a thin sheen that made rock glitter like old glass. Their headlamps painted pale cones on the slate. Somewhere above, wind threaded through a broken vent and turned into a soft whistle that would not stop. Evan tried not to think of music in the stone. The tunnel bent and opened into a chamber no bigger than a garage. A metal frame, bolted to the floor, stood at the center like a bare bed without a mattress. 6 empty brackets lined its sides. Each bracket had scuff marks where something heavy had sat and then been taken away. On the frame, a small plaque caught Wade's beam. He leaned in. "Ledger," he read. Cole breathed out, slow. "This is no kid's project." On the wall, a single photo hung in a plastic sleeve, crooked. A boy stood at a creek, hand raised, palm out, as if telling someone to stop. The water behind him was a soft blur. His posture was not. Evan felt his stomach tighten. He could not see the boy's face, but the stance was clear. A warning drawn in a body. Nolan's voice carried from the tunnel behind them, careful and hushed, as if the room could hear. "The frame balances what the creek borrows," he said, stepping into the light and keeping his hands close to his chest. "Equal weight above for what lies below. Not a trap, a counterweight. You keep the world from tilting." "Then why empty?" Wade asked. Nolan's throat moved. "If the brackets are bare, the ledger is out of balance." He looked at the photo, then at the frame again. When accounts don't settle, something keeps taking until it can give back. Evan moved the beam slowly across the floor. A tarp slumped in one corner like a shadow trying to look harmless. Wade pulled it aside with a quick, decisive lift. Beneath lay a crate, lid cracked but tied with twine. He slid the lid. Inside, bundles wrapped in brown paper. Tags tied with thin string. Numbers written in tidy ink that matched no case ledger Wade knew. Bone showed through one split seam, pale, clean, edged with a thin glass sheen where silica had fused smooth. For a beat, no one spoke. The hum of their lamps filled the room like a low note. Harlan's voice came thin over the radio, carrying from the barn. "Back out," he said, each word its own step. "You do not stand inside a ledger you do not understand. Fire in a dry wind." Evan stared at the crate. It felt like standing at the lip of a long equation written in a hand steadier than his. His light drifted to a sliver of paper half caught under the crate. He crouched, pried it loose. Grid lines and circles sketched in pencil. An arc marked like the creek. The same neat block letters Nolan had described. He turned the page. At the bottom, written as if explaining a rule to a child, sat a single line. "If you silence the giver, the debt will look for a throat." The first knock landed soft and was swallowed whole. Wade tried again, knuckles firmer this time. The door drank that sound too. He slid the spare key from beneath the chipped bird and worked the lock. The hinges moved without a creak, as if even the metal had learned to keep its breath. Cold air rolled over them, wool-scented, flat, and heavy, and the entryway stood like a mouth stuffed with cloth. Every vent was plugged with towels. Rugs hung on the walls like quilts. The house had been padded the way you wrap fragile things for a long trip. "Rhett," Wade called, voice low out of instinct. The word fell 6 inches and died. Evan stepped in beside him. His radio shouldered against his chest harness, quiet but warm. He called, "Tobin?" and heard only the dry whisper of his coat sleeve. The silence pushed back, thick as felt. He fought the irrational urge to tiptoe. This wasn't a church. Felt like one. They moved room to room, hands grazing the draped walls. The kitchen clock's second hand spun without a tick, mute as a film. No humming fridge, no plumbing groan. The house was a vacuum that had learned to wear furniture. A lump formed under the living room rug, a square, not a pipe. Wade crouched, lifted a corner. A trapdoor sat there, its pull ring wrapped in cloth so it wouldn't ring against wood. "Careful," Wade said. Evan nodded. He eased it open. The ladder down breathed out a sigh of cold earth. A low light burned below, one of those dim bulbs used to save power, made dimmer by a sleeve of gauze. Evan went first, boots soft on the rungs. The cellar was a shallow rectangle lined with canned goods and tools set in rubber cradles. Every glass jar wore a sock. A boy sat on a milk crate under the gauzed bulb, headphones over his ears, cord dangling to nowhere. He turned his head without surprise, like he had watched them cross the first floor through the ceiling. His lips shaped a word Evan could not hear. "You're too loud," said Evan's radio in a calm boy's voice. Wade stiffened. "That you, Tobin?" The boy pressed a finger to his own lips. Not angry, just certain. His eyes were steady, brown with a ring of gray that made him look older. He mouthed another sentence, careful, measured. Evan's radio spoke for him again. "Please, quiet." Rhett came down the ladder with slow, deliberate steps. Gray-faced, thinner than last month, older than last year. He stayed on the bottom rung a moment, like a man not sure the floor would hold his weight or his nerve. He lifted both hands in surrender. "We kept stuffing the house," he whispered. Even a whisper felt too loud. "It's the only way my boy sleeps." The radio carried the whisper instead of the air. "We kept stuffing the house. It's the only way my boy sleeps." Evan glanced at Wade. The mic hadn't been keyed. The set was not on broadcast. The signal was choosing its own paths. He crouched to Tobin's height, never crossing the invisible circle of space the boy had claimed with posture alone. "My name is Evan," he said, softer than before. He found himself moving his mouth as little as possible, words barely leaving his teeth. "We're only here to help." Tobin's gaze dipped to Evan's radio as if to greet it too. He looked down at the dirt floor. With a chalk nub, he drew 3 small circles and a long curve. The chalk scratch was a ghost of a sound. The curve matched the bend of a creek. "Is that hush water?" Evan asked. The radio answered, tone patient. "Yes." Tobin tapped the long arc twice and wrote a single word beside it in careful block letters. "Balance." He underlined it, slow strokes like making the rule stick to the ground. Wade crouched as well, keeping his hands visible. "Who taught you that word, son?" Tobin raised his eyes, shaped 4 letters with his lips. Deliberate. "Liam." Evan's chest tightened. The name hit like weather moving in. On speaker at Evan's shoulder, Harlan's measured voice came thin through the cloth-stuffed house. More thought than sound. "Copy, I'm listening. If you can get a sample of the patterns he's drawing, any proportional spacing, we can compare to the silica grooves." Tobin cocked his head toward the radio, curious. He reached for a small tin on a shelf. Inside lay wire loops the size of bracelets, some whole, some cracked with hairline breaks. Rhett slid off the last rung and stood behind his son, hands folded as if to keep them from shaking. "Nolan gave those out," Rhett said, breathing shallow. The radio made it audible. Said they were practice. Safe. After storms, the creek talks through him. He swallowed. He wakes up with a mouth full of echoes. Tobin picked up a cracked loop and pressed it to the dirt chalk curve. His lips didn't move. Evan's radio did. A different voice came now, higher, thinner, layered with a grain that wasn't static so much as distance. "Stand me up, not lay me down." Wade blinked. The sentence ran a cold hand along the back of his neck. Evan's mind flashed to bones lifting in water. The image arrived uninvited and left a taste like old coins. He kept his voice even. "Stand what up?" he asked. The radio didn't answer this time. Tobin drew a small upright rectangle over one of the circles and then a second, then a third. 3 caps risen. He tapped each one once, then the long arc twice. His eyes flicked to Evan's radio, then to Rhett's hands, then back to the chalk as if expecting the dirt to answer on its own. Wade leaned toward Rhett. "How long's this been happening?" Rhett's mouth tightened. "Since the big storm 2 weeks ago. Started with little hours." The radio carried his exact phrasing, small corrections and all. "Then whole nights. The house eats what it can. But after rain he hears everything the creek doesn't want to hold." Harlan spoke through the line, steadier now. "Evan, that stand-me-up phrasing, note it, The grooves I saw on the silica, they read like music grooves. Scales want to be completed. If the boy keeps pointing to balance, something is asking to be matched. Matched by who? Wade asked low. By whoever started it, Harlan said. Or by whoever can finish it. Tobin's hand drifted to another little tin. He lifted a loop that was whole and touched it to the chalked arc. Nothing. He chose a cracked one again. The radio produced a thin tremble that wanted to be a laugh. Evan recognized the human shape in it and the way it failed to cross the last inch into personhood. The sound stopped. The boy drew a small square near the chalk edge and wrote 2 words. 7th cap. Then he wrote a third with care. Under. He circled it twice. Evan followed his finger toward the back wall, toward the line on the floor that was not quite straight where the foundation met the shed beyond. His thoughts tried to run ahead, posts at the creek, caps in water, caps on land, missing weight. He pulled them back. Slow. Under the shed? He asked. The radio said nothing, but Tobin nodded once. Rhett pushed a palm across his jaw. We tried to bury the noise, he said. He did not look at Wade and did not look at Evan, as if the sentence was meant for the packed air and the earth alike. We layered gravel and poured sand. We set the mower on it and left it idling to make hum. We tried to bury the noise, but the noise learned to dig. The wheel was already humming under the shed when Evan brushed the last of the packed earth from its rim. The sound came up through his boots, low, patient, and sure, as if a machine deep in the hill had started without a switch. Damp wood pressed a cold smell into the air. River stones ringed the black disk like teeth. Milo crouched beside him, breath quick, lifting gritty crescents of dirt with his gloved fingers. The faint gray line under Milo's skin brightened with the touch, a thread of dusklight running from his thumb to his wrist. He flinched and tried to pass it off with a grin that did not last. Nolan knelt at the stone ring and steadied himself with one palm on the earth. His hands shook until he laced them together. Keeper, he said, voice thin. It holds the low parts so the creek doesn't have to. He stared at the disc the way a man looks at a dog he trained that will not heal. I built it from old mine plans. A box labeled, Signal Tests. I thought it would help. Speak straight, Wade said from the doorway, rain beating on the brim of his hat. His tone was even, but his jaw was tight. When storms pass and boys say their names, what does the wheel do? It catches the softest inch of a voice, Nolan said, eyes down. Spins it into the ground like thread. The frame in the quarry, my ledger, should have returned that thread once the pattern was complete. He swallowed. But the brackets are empty, so the keeper keeps. The creek keeps borrowing. It doesn't know when to stop. Evan stood and used a stick to draw on the packed dirt. 6 small rectangles for 6 empty brackets. A line to the wheel. He spoke quietly, almost to the plan itself. We fill the brackets with dead weight. Enough mass to satisfy the count. Make the ground think it is paid. He raised his eyes to Harlan on the radio. Will Slate do it? Slate is dense and quiet, Harlan answered through the speaker, calm but clipped. No metal contacting skin. Chins tucked. Keep your distance from the coil. Jamie, fetch 6 slabs. A second radio crackled as Deputy Jamie Cade answered on the run, boots thudding off the shed's floorboards before fading into the rain. Cole clipped a meter to the exposed cable and frowned at the jittering numbers. Resistance crawls like ants, he said. Never holds steady. He tapped the screen not to fix it but to make himself move. Whatever this is, it hates clear readings. Milo pressed the heel of his hand against his jaw. I can hear a key, he murmured. It sits in my teeth. I can match it if we need to push the pattern off. He tried to sound proud, but the gray line pulsed, and the pride turned into a quiet tremor in his throat. Evan's gaze snapped to him. That bright mark under the skin felt like a warning painted in pencil. We'll try weight first, he said. Your backup, not bait. He could feel the room lean toward the plan and away from the boy, and that was good. Plans could be broken. Boys should not be. Rhett stood in the doorway, hands on the jambs as if bracing the shed to keep it from breathing too fast. His lips were white at the corners. "Will this hurt him?" he asked. He did not say his son's name. The keeper's hum pressed into the pause. "It should not," Nolan said, but his eyes slid to the floor, as if the dirt might forgive him faster than any man could. "It should not," he repeated, softer. Thunder rolled somewhere to the east, the kind that thinks before it moves. The shed carried the sound like a bowl, gathering the low note and feeding it to the wheel. The hum thickened, a slow river under the boards. Tobin came up from the cellar without anyone calling him. He took the place at Evan's side like a shadow arriving to fit the shape that made it. He studied the wheel, then held out a palm. Evan passed him a pen. In neat block letters across skin, Tobin wrote, "When it starts, do not say names," then drew 3 careful lines under knot. He lifted the hand as if it were a sign posted at a bend in the trail. "Good rule," Wade said, softer now. He checked the yard with a quick sweep of his eyes, then angled his radio toward his shoulder. "Barn, we need safety kits at the shed door, and no one is to speak a name inside this line." "Copy." "Copy," Harlan said. "Remember, metal off bare skin. Keep your chins tucked if the tone swells. Milo if you must hum low and off-key. But not until Evan calls it." Evan set his mouth like a lock and nodded once. He drew a small circle around the wheel on the dirt map, then a longer line toward where the quarry cut into the hill. He kept his voice even, kept his hands slow. The ground here had a habit of liking any sound it did not have to chase. Jamie returned with slate slabs stacked on a dolly, each block wet with rain, each the size of a sleeping dog. He rolled them to the wheel and stepped back, chest rising and falling like he had run farther than the yard allowed. 6, he said. "All we could load fast." They moved carefully. Wade took one end, Cole the other. The stone's damp weight ate into their gloves. Evan slid a felt strap under the first slab so it would not scrape the ring of stones and throw a sharp note into the air. Everything low. Everything wrong for a music that wanted to be right. Milo hovered, hands shaking near his sides, fighting the urge to help. The gray under his skin ticked with the wheel's thrum. He kept his lips closed, but Evan saw the shape of a tone form and fade there, like a ripple that decided not to become a wave. "Slow," Evan said, guiding the slate toward the imaginary brackets he had drawn. He could feel the temptation to rush. Rushing felt like bravery in a shed full of noise, but rushing made errors sing. The first slab settled. For a beat, nothing changed. Then the hum dropped a fraction, a single step down the ladder of a song. The radios on their belts all clicked in agreement. The keeper sounded less certain, as if it were listening for a cue that had not arrived. Rhett let out a breath and then caught it again, as if he feared even that might be borrowed. He leaned in the door and gripped the jamb until old paint creaked under his fingers. Nolan moved his lips, counting to himself with no sound. His hands were still now, held together like prayer had been sewn into them. He would not step closer. He did not step back. He watched the circle he had made, the way a man watches a wheel he set rolling to see if it stops in a safe place. Cole checked the meter again. The ants on the screen crawled slower. "Still not steady," he said. "But it knows we touched it." Evan raised 2 fingers. Next slate. Wade and Cole bent. Jamie braced the dolly. The second block lifted in a grunt of breath, slid on felt and came down by the first. The hum dipped again and smeared at the edges, like a bell with a thumb pressed to it. Milo's jaw trembled. He swallowed the tone that wanted to escape. Tobin squeezed Evan's elbow once. A quiet anchor. "Third," Evan said. The word left his mouth like a small coin, spent carefully, counted twice. He met Rhett's eyes between steps, steady as he could make himself. He thought of a boy who could not speak. He thought of a father who would give anything if asked the wrong way. He thought of the wheel and the creak and the simple math of weight. They lifted. The shed floor creaked. Outside, the thunder rolled again and sat with them, a large patient thing with its head against the door. As the third slate left the dolly, the wheel's hum slipped lower, and the nearest radio woke with a dry breath. "Don't take, borrow," it said in a flat, layered tone that made the hair on Evan's arms stir. The words felt like a posted rule and like a plea. No one answered. No one spoke a name. Evan held the sentence in his head and set his will around it. The lamps trembled first. A thin shiver ran down the cords and into the metal ribs of the ledger frame, and the whole tunnel answered with a low, wrong bell. Slate blocks gave off a damp heat that smelled like wet stone pressed to an iron stove. Evan felt the tone in his teeth before he heard it with his ears, an ache that made his jaw clench, and he thought, keep it together, keep them safe, keep the line clear. Nolan crouched by the ground harp, fingers white on the tuning key. Again, he said, voice hushed and tight, and the wire answered with a thrum that slid just under hearing. Milo stood near the brackets, eyes closed, shoulders lifted as if the note itself had weight. I've got it, Milo murmured, a steady promise. I can match it. He breathed in and let out a tone that was almost nothing and somehow everything, a thread running alongside the hum that traveled from the buried wheel, through the cable, and up into the bones of the cave. At the mouth of the tunnel, Wade set 2 deputies with ropes, sleeves rolled, boots set. Hold fast, he told them, simple and flat, but his knuckles were pale around the coil. Harlan's voice crackled over the radio from the barn, counting under his breath like a man marking steps in the dark. Rising by halves, he said. Do not let it crest. Outside, rain stitched the quarry yard and ran in dark seams down Rhett's jacket. He clutched the felt-wrapped headphones against his chest like a life preserver, face turned to the sky as if trying to measure thunder with his skin. Tobin, small but steady beside Evan, held the handheld radio in both hands, thumbs poised, eyes fixed on the frame. The boy looked like a thin post rooted in hard earth. Evan drew a slow breath, found the rhythm of the hum, and kept his focus where it belonged. On Darren, on the deputies, on the nearest rope, on the next choice. The first slate block rang inside itself, a clean bowl struck by a careful hand. Heat faded. The note dropped. For an instant, the tunnel felt level again. Then the wheel under the shed, far away and somehow right here, spun harder, and the sound climbed back like a cold breath sliding under a door. Evan's skin prickled. The ledger frame groaned. The lamps burned a little yellower, stretching the men's shadows into long, thin warnings on the rock. Milo winced and rubbed his forearm. A faint ash-gray line, no wider than pencil lead, traced up from his wrist. It's looking, he said, not loud, not afraid, just naming it. It's noticing. Evan stepped toward him and set a palm to his shoulder. Back out, he said, calm. Not a plea, a rule. Milo shook his head, jaw set. I can still hold it a little longer. The hum swelled. Somewhere upstream, the creek posts woke. No one had touched them, but the drone feed on the monitor near Wade jittered, the picture vibrating like breath on glass. Harlan's count jumped. It's building. It's building. Wade signaled the deputies, short chops of his hand. Eyes on me. If anyone drops, you pull. The voice came then, through every radio, through the tin speaker on the workbench, through the small, warm wafer in Evan's pocket, clear as a knuckle rapping a table. Balance comes when the maker speaks last, it said. Not young, not old, not kind, not cruel.
Exakt.
A rule read aloud. Wade's mouth opened. No sound came. He blinked and touched his throat as if checking a collar that had shrunk. Evan felt the air around Wade change, too still, too close, as if silence had hands and had set them gently, possessively, on the man's voice. Dramatic irony slid in like a knife. The ground was not stealing at random. It was keeping its books. If the pattern asked for the maker, it would not settle for anyone else. The rain brought Darren in, the sound of boots slapping water, a man who had decided he would rather drown than watch. He burst past the ropes, hair dark with weather, eyes wild, breath ragged. Take mine, he shouted. Take mine, take mine. The words rang like nails driven too fast.
Darren, no.
Wade's lips formed the warning, but only a rasp came out. The drone feed flared. At Hushwater, a lattice of pale lines lifted in the water as if light itself were weaving net over net. Evan saw it without seeing it, the half-circle waking, the posts answering, because the tunnel answered too. The frame tightened, the hum leaned toward a pitch that made every tooth hurt, and the ground seemed to pull its own breath, ready to close a loop with a father's name. Not him, Evan thought, a bright line in the mind. Not him. This was the challenge, stripped to bone. Keep a grieving man from paying the wrong debt to the wrong bank. He scanned the table, the coils, the notes, the tiny speaker Nolan had pulled from the tin earlier. His fingers found the wafer in his pocket. Heat soaked into his palm. It reminded him of a stone warmed in a campfire, the kind you pick up without thinking and then cannot let go. Evan, Milo said, voice thin now, gray line creeping toward the elbow. It wants a throat. I can. Stop. Evan didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He moved. 2 steps took him inside the rig's glow. He felt the field across his skin like cobwebs wet from rain. He pressed the wafer to the notch of his throat, and for a split second he hesitated, not from fear, but from the need to keep a promise he made to himself this morning. Be honest, even when honest means strange. This was strange. It was also true. Borrow me, he whispered, lips hardly moving. Heat bloomed through the wafer. The cold note in the tunnel shivered, bent, then caught. Every radio filled with his voice, his cadence, his breath, saying, not him. The sound came from the tin, from the handheld, from the belt sets, from the drone feed in a thin, eerie chorus. His real mouth, meanwhile, went still, as if someone had pressed 2 fingers gently over his windpipe and asked for quiet, please. The ledger paused. Not off, not on. A hitch between beats. The lamps steadied. Milo's tone slipped, then settled lower. Harlan's count on the radio held at the edge of a rise. Numbers clipped and careful. Hold, hold. Do not crest. Wade sucked in air like a man surfacing from a deep pool. He found 1 syllable, then another. Darren back. He made it sound like an order and a prayer. Darren wavered, chest heaving, eyes locked on the humming frame. Rainwater had cut a line down his cheek that looked, in this light, like a seam of glass. He's a boy, he said, voice breaking. He is a boy. He took a step and stopped because Tobin reached him first, small hand on his sleeve, radio clutched to his chest. The boy didn't speak. He just shook his head once, slow, as if counting a number you must not pass. Evan held the wafer and tried to think past the rush in his ears. The rule had spoken. The maker must speak last. If the loop thought it had the maker's voice, some pattern it recognized in timbre or tone, would it stand down? He didn't know. He knew only what he could control. He could buy time. He could hold the line. He could refuse the wrong trade. The sound in the frame shifted again. A careful hand turning a dial. It searched like a person in a dark room reaching for a familiar chair. The deputies leaned their weight back on the ropes, boots skidding on wet stone. Wade kept a palm up, stay. Not another step. His other hand pointed at the battery inverter. If it spikes, he rasped to Milo. Drop a half. Milo nodded, sweat beading at his hairline. Half, he said, and lowered the tone he made by barely a breath. The ache in Evan's teeth eased. The heat in the slate blocks fell a shade. Nolan's fingers tightened around the harp's frame. He watched Evan with a face like a thin sheet of paper pulled tight at the edges. Guilt stood behind his eyes, bright and plain. Hold it, Nolan said, tone ragged but set. He plucked a lower string just once. The wire sang a wrong note on purpose, and the cave liked the wrongness. You could feel it, the way an animal settles when you stop looking it in the eye. Rhett appeared in the mouth of the tunnel, face washed pale by the lamps. He didn't enter. He didn't call. He just stood there in the rain as if the right kind of waiting could keep his son whole. Evan let his focus narrow to a pin. Breath in, breath out. The wafer's warm face pressed his skin. The chorus of radios repeated his words again, softer this time. Not him. And the frame seemed to weigh that sentence like a coin in a clerk's hand. The hum did not vanish. It changed, flattened, almost a question. He could feel the moment tip. He could feel the next choice coiling up, ready to strike if anyone spoke the wrong word. if anyone fed the loop a name it wanted. He locked his jaw and kept his tongue still, refusing even the shape of a sound. Time stretched. A drop of water from the ceiling struck the edge of a bracket and ticked like a metronome. The deputy's ropes creaked. Milo's breath counted under the hum. Harlan's voice came thin but even across the static. "Whatever you are doing, hold it." Evan held. Milo held. Nolan held. Wade held. Darren stood with Tobin's hand on his sleeve and did not speak his son's name again. The frame gave a small, tired sigh, as if a gear had eased back one tooth. The lamps drew a little brighter. The ache in the air thinned to something a man could live inside for more than a few minutes. Evan's throat burned, but he refused to test it. He refused to open his mouth at all. He kept the wafer where it was and made himself a rule. I will not be the one who breaks the count. In the quiet that followed, not silence, never silence, only a little space to breathe, he felt the weight of what he had promised when he came to this hill town at dawn. Honesty, even when honest meant strange. This was strange. It was also the only honest thing to do. The air thinned first. Everyone felt it. A soft, mean pressure in the ears, just as the keeper's hum slipped and wavered like a hand deciding which rope to grab. Evan steadied himself against the tunnel wall, jaw tight, teeth buzzing. Nolan stood frozen at the ledger plaque, eyes drawn to the ground harp as sweat crept down his temple like a slow thread of ink. He tried to make his voice small. The plans, they were signed a veil. He whispered, barely more than breath. He wrote the same rule. Harlan didn't look away from the tablet glowing in his hands. His voice was level, but his knuckles had gone pale. The pattern demands a closing tone from the maker. Not the creak. Not the wheel. The maker. He lifted his eyes, and the whole room turned toward Nolan. Nolan's mouth opened and closed once, the way a man tests cold water before stepping in. He glanced at Evan, the silent question of a boy asking to be allowed to fix his own mistake, and then at Wade, who gave a short nod that was more duty than blessing. Nolan swallowed. He stepped into the ring of light, shoulders hunched, fingers shaking as he reached for the harp's lowest wire. "Easy," Wade warned, voice rough with sand. One hand lifted, the other on his belt like he was keeping himself braced. "Just don't rush it." Nolan set 2 fingers to the wire. The touch drew a faint shimmer from the metal frame. He drew a breath, long and careful, then let out a single tone, thin at first, then steady, a straight line you could follow in the dark. He shaped a second tone, softer, placed between the first and the hum of the keeper, and then a third, the smallest of the 3, a final bead strung to close the loop. The ledger answered. It wasn't loud. The frame sighed, a deep metal exhale that you felt in your ribs more than heard with your ears. At Hushwater, the posts dimmed on the drone feed. The bright lattice that had haunted the creek relaxed and thinned until the stones shone without a net. "Hold it," Harlan said, his voice rising with the line on his screen. "Hold that tone right there." Milo pressed his hand to his forearm. The gray line under his skin faded from elbow to wrist to thumb, shrinking to a dark that looked like old pencil trapped beneath the surface. He blinked, relief and fear mixing in his eyes. "It's letting go," he said, breathy, hopeful. Wade sucked in a startled breath and then coughed out a laugh that broke halfway, the sound of a rope going slack. "I've got my voice again," he said, surprise softening into a quiet promise. "No names in circles. Ever again." Outside, in the slow rain, Rhett's legs gave. He dropped to his knees in the mud, head bowed, hands open, not in despair but in the heavy landing of hope. The radios carried another voice, thin as reeds in wind. Tobin pressed his set to his chest like a boy guarding a bird. "Stand me up," the radio said, the words small, patient. "Sure." Evan's throat burned with the urge to answer. Nothing came. He nodded instead, quick and clear, to Wade and Harlan. Together they lifted Liam's recovered bones from the padded case and placed them upright in a simple rack. No music rose. No glow. The bones rested, as if standing was enough. Under the shed, the keeper's hum sank lower and lower until it stopped with a small, final click that felt like a lock turning open. A steady beep pulsed from the far corner of the tunnel. Beep, 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 tidy and stubborn. Nolan, still inside the ring of light, flinched and looked back, eyes bright, throat working. Wade was there first, sweeping his light along stacked stones. There, he said, pointing to a seam. Behind it. Cole levered 2 stones aside. A narrow cache opened, cut into the wall like a drawer. Wax paper crinkled in the beam. Evan reached in with careful hands. He set out folded maps, edges curled and waxed against damp. A cloth bag slid out next, heavy with arrowheads that clicked together like teeth. And then, Evan paused, breath held. The smooth curve of a skull cap, edges glassed where bone met fused silica, clean and terrible in the light. A folded note lay beneath it, ink stark in tidy block letters. Wade read it aloud, voice steady as he could make it. Return is not back. Return is balance. No one moved for a full breath. The words hung there, simple and exact, answering questions none of them wanted to ask out loud. Nolan's chest hitched. He reached for a reply that wouldn't come. His voice broke mid-breath, then didn't return. He tried again, lips shaping sound that refused to rise. Not hoarse, not strained, just empty. His eyes widened. His hand went to his throat. Harlan looked up from the data with a face that had seen many endings and still hated this one. The ledger closed by the maker, he said, as if reading a rule posted on the wall. The cost is the maker's voice. Nolan nodded once, twice, as if to say he'd known it would ask for something and had hoped it would ask for less. He dropped his gaze, shoulders finally lowering. In the hush, the tunnels seemed bigger. Water ticked somewhere deep. The lamps buzzed. Evan pressed his fingers to his own throat. He found only quiet. The ache there was more than soreness. It was a held debt. He wanted to tell Darren he was sorry for every delay, to tell Rhett that the creek was done taking, to tell Tobin he had done well, better than most men twice his age. He wanted to tell Wade to pull the men out slow, careful, count every step. He wanted to say thank you to Nolan for stepping forward when no one else could. His mouth shaped the words. His breath carried nothing. On the table, the tin's small speaker changed its mind about silence. It breathed one more time, not music, not code, only a voice that had been a boy's but was calmer now, like a tide settling into its shore. Finish the count, then go home, the radio whispered. Cones went down in a tight arc along the bank, and hush water stared back with dull, wet caps like sleeping eyes. No wind, no birds, just the low scrape of rubber boots, the whisper of felt sliding under metal, and the slow drip of creek water from moss-dark stones. Wade kept his voice level. Nobody inside the half-circle until I say, we respect the line. He planted one more cone and stepped back, shoulders square, hand loose near his belt, steady because everyone else needed him steady. Nolan stood with a clipboard pressed to his chest. His throat wrapped in a scarf, though it was not cold. He could not speak, but his eyes moved quick, apologetic, and exact. He wrote, "Detune first, then remove," in clean block letters and drew a 7 inside a circle. He underlined it once, then looked to Evan as if to ask for permission he didn't deserve. Evan, voiceless since yesterday, answered by sketching the same 7, then a triangle. 3 caps in water, 3 weights in the ledger, 1 keeper under the shed. He lifted the page so every man saw the plan and tapped it twice with the back of his pencil. Once for the creek, once for the cost. Tobin stood where mud kissed stone, a boy at attention, the stick in his hand tapping a rhythm that set the pace of their nerves. 1, 2, 3, pause, 1, 2, 3, pause, 1. His face was pale but calm, the way some boys get calm when a room of men cannot find the floor. Each tap brought a small ripple under the caps, as if the water itself was listening for the count. Milo laid the coil on a tarp and knelt until his breath fogged the black surface. He closed his eyes, hummed low and off-key on purpose, and winced as a faint grade under his skin brightened like the ember of a pencil mark. Wrong note, he whispered, forcing the hum flatter, and the caps seemed to dull further, their light sinking back into the water like a held breath. On speaker from the ranger barn, Harlan called numbers in a clean, even tone. Amplitude falling. Keep the detune. Hold your spacing. Metal clinked as Rhett paid out a rope around a pine and belayed it hard, as if fear could be tied the way you tie a boat that doesn't know the current has turned. First post, Wade said. Cole crouched, slid felt under the cap with 2 fingers, and twisted gently. The metal turned with the grudging feel of a tooth that did not want to leave the gum. Water shivered. The lattice did not rise. The radio on Evan's belt hissed, 1 dry breath, then quiet again. Wade nodded once. Good. Second post. Cole reached. His boots skated on a vein of slick stone, his heel hit hard, and his weight shifted inside the circle. His right foot plunged ankle-deep, not into water, but into a clear skin that closed around him like fresh sugar glass. He grunted, not with panic but the shock of cold and pressure. Stuck? The word snapped off as Wade lunged and Darren took the rope, the line humming under all that held back strength. Rhett leaned back until the pine bark sang under the strain. A top layer of creek clenched, thin and bright as ice in a windshield crack. Climbed Cole's boot, whispering. Evan's chest tightened. The lattice wasn't rising, it was choosing. He reached into his pocket, pulled the broken arrowhead, and tossed it to Wade. Wade caught it without looking, teeth set, and tapped at the skin with quick, exact blows. Keep. The glass fissured, webbing fine as frost around Cole's ankle. Another chip and the skin split with a wet crack. Water rushed in, the clear crust receding as if it had never been there. Cole stumbled back to the bank, breath loud in his mask, and nodded once to say he was whole. The radio spit air and then a voice, older than any of them, even in how it held its words, came thin but steady. Avali. Count to 7. Maker speaks last. It wasn't a threat. It was a rule, and rules live long. Harlan's breath brushed the mic copy name. Copy rule. His tone stayed clinical, but his pause told on him. Somewhere inside, he did not like how easily a name had walked into their circle. Milo's gray mark flared to his forearm. He flinched, lifted his chin, and pushed his hum lower, forcing the wrongness to smear across the tone until it scraped. Stay with me, he said through his teeth. Stay with the wrong. The caps dimmed. The stone skin around Cole's boot thinned, sighed, and turned back into plain water. On the clipboard, Tobin wrote, "He is not the maker," and underlined he twice. He held Nolan's gaze like a small anchor. Nolan's hands shook. He nodded once, twice, the way a man nods at his own guilt when he can't outtalk it anymore. Evan pointed to the sketch, the circle that marked the buried keeper, then to the iron drain cover Wade had dragged up from the quarry tunnel. He drew an arrow down. Wade squinted at the weight, then at the bank, slick, uneven, the slope steep enough to invite a fall. "We don't say names inside the line," he said to no one and everyone. "Keep your mouths shut and your feet honest." He and Cole took the iron, one on each side, their boots placing a slow lesson into the mud. They reached the mark. Tobin's tap kept the beat. 1, 2, 3, pause, 1, 2, 3, pause, 1. When the iron dropped over the buried wheel, it struck with a deep, hollow thud that seemed to come up from the ground and down from the sky at once. The tone in the water fell with it, low as a drum behind a wall. The creek's surface loosened, lines of light unwinding like thread. Then Liam's voice, thin and calm, came through every radio with the careful shape kids use when sharing a code. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. That last one hit like a key brushing a lock. On the drone feed, Harlan called the change. Grid thinning. Shine is dulling. Hold your places. The lattice dissolved to a faint haze and then to nothing. The silica on the stones lost its sheen like wet glass drying to dust. Caps went dark, the breath underneath them spent for now. Milo opened his eyes. The gray line retreated to a dot, a tiny bruise of graphite under skin. He flexed his hand and let out a breath that might have been a laugh if he had any air left for it. Tobin's shoulders untightened by degrees until he seemed smaller and more like a boy. Rhett let the rope go slack, chest shaking once, twice. Then he wiped his face with the back of his hand and looked at the water with something like thanks. Evan stepped forward to the wet bank and knelt. Mud pressed cold against his jeans. He wrote in big letters with the side of a stick, so the words would stand even if his hand trembled. Return is balance, not back. The sentence looked simple, like a sign you'd hang at a crossroads. The radios took it up in Liam's tone, repeating it twice, like a teacher making sure the lesson stuck. Then silence. Not just a pause, but an agreed-upon rest. The drill bit whined, bit into the pine, and threw a curl of damp sawdust onto Wade Coulter's boots. Level, Cole Rourke said. Eyes narrowed, both hands steadying the new sign at mile marker 23. The plank read, in plain, dark letters, no devices beyond this point. Wade checked the bubble, nudged the post a hair to the east, then leaned his weight in as the driver thudded the final spike home. The woods watched in a hush that felt aware. Radios lay clipped to belts but powered off. The creek below moved brown and ordinary, like it had rehearsed being harmless. Wade stepped back. That's it, he said, voice low, as if speaking too loudly might wake a sleeping thing. Cole wiped his palms on his jeans. A thin rain stitched the air and made the letters shine. By noon, Wade sat alone at a steel desk in the ranger barn with a legal pad and a black pen. No science words.
No guesswork.
He wrote what he had seen and what he could stand behind. Posts removed. Coils recovered. A ledger frame in the quarry. Not requested, not sanctioned. He listed names as initials and sealed the full list in a small brown box for the court clerk. Harlan stood in the doorway a moment, rain ticking off his coat, and said, "Plain is good." Wade nodded and kept writing until the page stopped arguing with him. In the afternoon, Dr. Jace Harlan pushed a cart down a quiet hallway. On it rested a cedar box the size of a folded jacket. Darren Quarry met him at the door. His hands trembled as he reached, then steadied. Harlan spoke like a man setting a fragile instrument on a shelf. Bones cleaned, glass trimmed, everything recorded, everything returned. Darren's throat worked. He deserves stillness. Harlan held his gaze and said, "He has it." Late light broke over a hillside above Gray Hollow. The ground there was soft but not wet, a good hold for a small place of rest. Men climbed the slope in a line, boots muted in the grass. Darren stood at the head with the cedar box in his arms. To his right were Rhett Everhart and Wade, faces drawn but certain. Evan Merrick came up slow, a notepad tucked into his jacket, his voice still absent but his eyes clear. Nolan Crest followed, thin as a reed, fingers stained with ink, a card in his pocket. Milo Cade, a band at his wrist, kept flexing his hand as if the air pressed back. Cole carried a folded tarp and a spade. Tobin Everhart walked in short steps beside Rhett, chin set, the broken arrowhead clutched like a coin. They lowered the box. Wind carried the smell of wet grass and distant rock. No one stepped too close. Nolan knelt, touched a small wafer to the earth, and slipped a card under the edge. On it he had written, "Maker speaks last." He pressed 2 fingers to his throat, eyes bright with the ache of a voice that would not come, then bowed his head. Darren looked at him, a single hard nod, thanks and warning in the same motion. Evan lifted his hand and traced a shape in the air for Darren. A loop, from the hill to a line of trees and back again. He pointed to the creek's direction, then to the ground at their feet, then wrote one word on his notepad and turned it so Darren could see, "Home." The corner of Darren's mouth twitched. He blinked fast and steadied himself with breath. Tobin stepped forward. He placed the broken arrowhead on the soil. He tilted his head, listening to something inside himself, and whispered a number only his own ears caught. His lips moved again, counting without sound, as if finishing a sum he had been holding open too long. Rhett rested a hand on the boy's shoulder and stood still until Tobin's fingers unclenched. Milo adjusted the band around his wrist. The gray dot under his skin had faded to almost nothing, but he rubbed it as if reading weather through bone. "I can still feel the tall clouds coming," he said. almost apologetic. Wade half smiled. Then we will keep a roof ready, he answered, quiet. Down at Hushwater, Cole led a crew of deputies to the bend. They had learned the new rules: felt under boots, slow hands, no names in circles. Iron bars bit into wet sand. Posts came up with soft pops and shallow sighs. Each hole they filled with clean river stones that made no sound when the rain touched them. Cole held his breath for a second every time he leveled the last rock. Each time, nothing sang. He nodded once and moved to the next scar. Behind the Everhart house, the buried keeper stayed where they had left it, under iron and gravel. Wade stood over the patch with a folded map and pointed. "Marker," he said to Cole. "Not a trap. Do not touch." Cole made a note and drew a big box around it. Harlan shut himself in the small evidence room at the station and laid out a battered sleeve marked "A Veil." He slid the quarry photo inside, wrote "Do not copy" in clean block letters across the top of the folder, and taped the corners like a man sealing a crate for a long voyage. He paused, palm flat on the file. Then he shelved it and locked the door. Back at Rhett's house, felt squares came off vents one by one. The windows went up and stayed up. Air moved in and out like lungs that had been held too long under water. That night Tobin fell asleep without his headphones. Rhett sat in the chair by the bed and watched his son breathe, counting not to 7 but to the easy rise and fall of a boy at rest. Once Tobin stirred, and Rhett tensed, but the room held only quiet and the trickle of night rain in the downspout. Rhett let his shoulders drop and closed his eyes, just for a minute. Toward dusk, Evan walked the Nightstone Trail alone. He kept the radio off and let the hush of the trees settle over him like a light coat. Mile marker 23 came and went with only the clean shape of that new sign and the soft scrape of his boot on the stone. He stopped at the bank where he had once written a sentence in mud. The river had done what rivers do, taken the words and carried them down and let the bank forget. He stood a while listening. Water passed roots and stones. A thrush called twice from a pine. The echo, when it came, brought only the bird back to itself. No boy, no man, no rule, just sound doing what sound should do. Evan touched his throat and felt the calm space where words should be. It hurt and it helped. He smiled, small and sure, and breathed in the clean damp of the bank. On the bridge upstream, Nolan waited. He raised a hand when he saw Evan. His smile held apology and relief, a careful peace. Evan lifted his own hand. No need to cross, no need to speak. Two men who had built the wrong thing and then taken it apart piece by piece until the ground felt square again. Wade found an envelope on the ranger station counter at dark. No name. A single tear in the top edge. He slid the page out and read, "If you silence the giver, the debt will look for a throat." He stood very still. The overhead light hummed and then settled. He reached for the heavy stapler, pressed the note onto a file stiff with other papers, and drove the metal home, the sound flat and final. On the hill, under a sky washed clean by thin rain, Darren sat by the fresh earth. He did not move for a long time. He told a story in his head, one Liam already knew, about a creek that used to speak and now did not, about counting and stopping, about a father who learned to be quiet the right way. He stood, smoothed the grass with his palm, and chose the long path home. They all walked through the days with new rules that were not posted on boards or printed on maps. A simple set, spoken low, passed from man to man like a tool that fits any hand. Count to 7, move slow. Do not say names where circles hold. Leave weight where weight belongs. When Cole checked the bend, he stepped wide without thinking. When Milo felt a shift in his wrist, he looked east and told Wade the wind would bring gentle rain, not thunder. When Harlan opened the evidence room, he touched the tape and reminded himself why silence was fair. When Evan traced a loop of air for a father, he made sure it always closed at home. Night settled over Gray Hollow, soft and exact. Porch lights clicked on. Radios lay quiet in their chargers, as if sleeping. Men who had spent weeks speaking to the wrong parts of the world went to bed and let the right parts speak again. Their hearts, their breath, the small creak of a stair. They had put things back where they belonged. Bones to ground, plans to boxes, signs to posts, hands to stillness. They all learned new rules that were not written on any sign. Count to 7, do not say names in circles, and remember that return means balance, not back. When thunder rolled 2 valleys away, the creek did not answer, and the radio stayed dumb, and the men of Grey Hollow slept, each with his own quiet, earned fair and held firm, as if a debt had finally been paid and the ground, at last, agreed to let them keep it. Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional. It delves into themes of disappearance, the unknown horrors lurking in the wilderness, and the terrifying intersection of science fiction and reality. Its purpose is to provoke thought about fear, loss, and the dark mysteries that challenge our understanding of life and death.